This short video will focus on keeping your notes useful. First of all, there's no point in creating notes if they do not help you with learning or assessment. It's wasted time if they're not effective. Now, if you're using a really highly creative and good for learning note-taking technique, sometimes the process of creating those notes is enough. The flow technique might be an example of this, but it isn't always enough, and revisiting and reprocessing those notes is important and essential for your learning, particularly if you're using something like the linear note-taking format. Notes can form a valuable aid for your revision, but you should visit them regularly so that your notes can help cement your learning. When you do revisit them, it's really important to note that reading them is not enough. If you really want to learn, you're going to have to do something with that information. You can do that by consolidating your learning by using notes to make more notes. So you may record something with a linear note-taking technique and then later consolidate that into a mind map. No matter what note-taking technique you are using, you can make it more active and better for learning if you put a focus on creation and not copying. Your words, your understanding, not the work of somebody else. You've got to do more than a photocopier or a computer can do, so represent your learning and your thoughts. Your notes are not useful if you can't find them, so whatever you do, make sure you keep them organised. And while this video series has focused on using notes to help with learning alongside lectures and reading, they should really feed into your writing and other assessments. So check out the Skills Team videos on essays and critical thinking for more information on how you can do that. I also think it's useful to look at Ebonhouse's forgetting curve. Ebonhouse argues that whenever we are engaging with something directly, it's 100% retained in our mind in that moment. It's in our active working memory. However, you'll see, as time passes on, we quickly start to forget pieces of that. So as little as 20 minutes later, 40% of that learning and information is gone. An hour later, you're down to 40%. And as time goes on further, up to a month later, you're only remembering 20% of that lecture or 20% of that reading. This should really worry you from a learning perspective. However, all is not lost. Spaced repetition is one approach to helping defeat the forgetting curve. And with spaced repetition, what you essentially do is as time passes, you continue to revisit that information at greater spaces of repetition. So you may attend a lecture, take some notes, and then later that evening, go through them again. Then maybe revisit them a week later and do something else, a fortnight later and do something else, a month later and do something else. And with each repetition, you'll notice the curve is not as steep, it plateaus higher, and you're beginning to commit things to that long-term memory. But this looks messy. So how could you do it in practice? Let's look at how you could apply multiple rounds of active learning based on revisiting your notes and creating new ones. So here we've got a month. On the first of the month, you attend an online lecture and take some notes using the Cornell method. Then, straight after the lecture, you just quickly review those notes to correct your handwriting or typos and put in a couple of extra things you didn't have time in the session. Again, not long, just a very brief revisit. 2 days later, you revisit those Cornell notes to fill in those summaries at the bottom, again forcing you to revisit that information and condense it down into those smaller blocks. What is effectively a fortnight after that session, you create a mind map for your lectures, and actually you might summarise 2 or 3 of them together and even incorporate some of your reading. So at this point we're summarising multiple summary areas from multiple sets of Cornell notes, bringing those things together so we can see that bigger picture. And then towards the end of the month, you revisit several of your mind maps, your big summaries, and start to create some flashcards to help you revise some of those key concepts and topics that you really want to ensure you understand moving forwards. Hopefully that's a real practical way in which you can take forward notes for better and more effective learning. And on that note, how did we do? Let us know in the YouTube comment area if you've got any feedback, comments or further ideas for videos. We can't wait to hear. As always, please follow us on our social media for more news, helpful information and tips. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube.